Okay, so let's pick up where we left off the other day. We have our note-taking app here. Very, very simple. It's just a bootstrap design with an input, excuse me, and an add button. When this app refreshes, it saves the state of whatever was in the input. Now, I'm not asking you to do this as well, but this was just to demonstrate the feature that exists with local storage to store an item in local storage and then retrieve it again once the page is loaded, which we did last time. We take the input and we set it equal to whatever the value was that was stored inside of local storage last time. And we can go in the application tab and take a look at local storage, and we can see that the note name is listed there. And if you recall, as I change this, it actually live updates inside of local storage so that the browser remembers exactly where we were last time that we exited the app. So that if I hit refresh, it remembers the actual text that was in there, pulled from local storage. So what I wanted to continue with today is to show you Dexie. So we kind of got this started last class um, by initializing a new local database. Remember, this is local. This isn't using a remote server, does not require an internet connection. So if this app was cached on someone's device, it would still remember all of these settings. Dexie, again, as a reminder, is this nice little tool that wraps IndexedDB in the web browser. As I mentioned last class, you should have something like this or something like local storage in whatever system you are using, whether it's React, whether it's Flutter, whether it's Kotlin and Android. Everything has some sort of local storage capabilities. This one happens to work with the web, with just straight JavaScript. There are also adapters to work with Svelte, React, Vue, and Angular. So if you're using any of those, you may be able to also utilize IndexedDB or whatever the equivalent is inside of the framework that you're using. So back to this, what we did was we basically initialized Dexie, whoops, and we said, okay, we're going to create a new database called Notes. And in fact, if we go to IndexedDB, you'll actually see a database called Notes here. Then we said in our Notes database, each line represents a new table in that database. Our database is only going to have one table, and this table is going to consist of a column for ID, name, and content. So we're going to have a unique name for our, well, not necessarily unique, but we are going to have a name for each one of our notes. And then we're going to have a content field that's going to store all of the content for our note. We also have an auto incrementing ID so that we can uniquely identify each note once it's pulled from our local database. When the app first loads, we drop in to our notes table a new name value and a new content value. Now, I'm actually going to comment this out because now that our app is initialized, every time this page loads, it adds a new item into our database, and we don't need that to happen. You'll actually note that if I go in here, into IndexedDB here, that there's a bunch of starter notes in here, and they're all the same content. Just because every time I've refreshed this page, it keeps adding a new one. So I've taken that away. So let's add the functionality to actually create a new note. I think for this, I'm going to use some sort of card functionality or card layout. So let me load up Bootstrap, not Bootstrap CDN. I'm going to actually go to just regular Bootstrap. Um, and I'm going to search for card. I think maybe there we go. So they have this nice little card component. I think that's what I'm going to use for my notes because that also allows me the ability to add some actions onto my notes as well. Let's see what we're going to use for this. I'll start with the kitchen sink example because this could be the title for our note. This could be the content for our note. And then we could have some action buttons at the bottom for our note. All right, so I'm going to use this. And I'm going to copy this into our app here. Let's actually just put it, just so we can kind of see what it looks like first. I'm just going to put it here. There we go. All right, so that's what we're looking at for our note. We're not going to use the image. So let's get rid of that. And we're not going to use the list group. So let's get rid of that. And I'm not going to implement this feature yet, but I will put placeholders here. So I'm going to put an edit button, a delete button. And so we have card link. I actually want those to look like buttons. So I'm just going to do btn, see if that looks better. And then btn primary. All right. So if you're familiar with Bootstrap, this should look pretty familiar to you, but don't worry if you don't. This part right here really isn't important. Whatever framework you're using is going to have something equivalent to this for showing buttons and customizing the way that they render on the page. So we're going to do another button here, and instead of primary, I'm going to do button. I think it's danger is the one I want. Yeah, there we go. Now I could add icons like Bootstrap icons to this as well, but I'm just going to leave these for now. All right, what else? I don't want to set the width on this. I just want it to kind of fill up the space that's available there. And then I'm also going to, I don't like the padding on the top and the bottom, so I'm going to do, let's see, we'll do NY4, maybe. There we go. All right, so that's going to add a little spacing to the top and the bottom of our cards. So that looks pretty good. So we're gonna reuse this. Now that we have some actual cards in here, or excuse me, not cards, some notes in our local database. What I'm gonna do is recreate this layout or this card every time, or excuse me, whenever the page loads. So I'm going to do a query to get all of the items in here. And every time I get all of those items when the page loads, we're going to write this card to the display. All right. So let's do that. Let's do a little query to the database to have us get all of the notes in the notes table. And the queries look like this. So we've got some sort of variable that we declare, and then we query that database and we retrieve it to an array. We're not going to do anything fancy here. Although I might modify this query slightly to change the way the order in which these appear. Like I might do it by ID descending so that the most recent card or note is at the top. But we'll see. We'll get there. We'll see when we get there. All right, so I'm going to copy this. And every time the page loads, we'll say, let's get the notes in our local, not local DB. And here's an example. Now we're going to get an error message here because old friends doesn't exist. So I'm going to say we will get all notes. And in order to do that, we're going to query our database. There's our database here, our notes database. And then the next is dot table. All right, so this is generally the format that we use. It's db dot table name. All right, whenever we're querying. So we don't have a friends table, but we do have a notes table. Now we don't have an age field, so we're not going to do that. Let's just get all of them like that. Oh, yep, we don't want to use a weight. We do want to do that. All right, perfect. All right, so it's not doing anything yet. So if I do console.log all notes, let's see what happens. And what we get in return is actually not an array, but we get what's called a promise. This will make sense if you've done any asynchronous programming before. This is not really something that we cover in this class, but I just want to note that that is actually why the await keyword was there, because it basically allows you to wait for the results to return. However, instead, what we have to do for that is say all notes dot. Now, let me show you really quickly. Let's see if we have the documentation for this. Let's see. This is okay. So this is what they look like. Basically, you have these different outcomes when you're given a promise. Once it completes, you can run a then function and do something with the result. If there is a problem, you can catch the error and then do something with the error. There's also finally, which runs no matter which happens. So basically, if a then happens, then a finally runs. If a catch happens when there's an error, finally runs after that. We're just going to use then and catch. So if we use then, that should give us a result. All right, so let's try that. So we'll do all notes dot then. So once all notes are retrieved, then we run this function. And this is an anonymous function that is given whatever the result is of our query up here for all notes. All right. So let's try that. So we'll do console.log result. And I forgot some code there. And there we go. So page loaded. It tried to run a query. And then once the query finished and there were results returned, we have this function to intercept those results, and we can do whatever we want with those results. I'm actually going to call this results because I think that makes more sense. Or actually, you know what? Let's just do rows, because each one of these is going to be a row in the database. I like that better. And here we go. There's our array of all the objects. Looks like there's 10 of them, which does line up with what we see in IndexedDB here. So that looks good. And if we expand our objects, we get the content, the ID, and the name. There we go. All right. So now we need to use these values to populate this card. So I'm going to make a function that basically generates a new card for us to display on the screen. Um, we'll call this function card, and we will pass to this function an ID, content, whoops, sorry, ID, name, and content. Now we'll use name ID or ID name and content to basically generate this HTML here, which should be pretty simple and straightforward. Let's see, where does this end? Right here. All right, so I'm going to take this here and move this out. All right. So we'll say let card equal that HTML template that we created here. I think we can do that, right? I gotta find out, won't we? And it looks like that. Now, because this is a template literal, again, I apologize if you're not familiar with this in JavaScript. Most languages have something like this. We're going to put the name inside of the card title. So we can do that just by taking this out. We can use our special notation here, and we can put in name. Because when we run this function, we are given the values of ID, name, and content. So we can just drop those in as variables. Do the same thing with content, like that. Beautiful. All right, so that's our template. I want to use the ID as well. So I'm going to use this, use HTML data attributes. Say data dash ID equals. That way we can keep track of which item is which by its unique identifier. And I will put here, I will also do this template literal like that. All right. So now every card that's generated based on the data in our database will have an ID that references the ID in the database, whatever the name is, and whatever the content is. All right. So now that I'm looking at this, I don't think we need to store this as a variable. We can actually just return this entire string. So I'm just going to do return here. All right. I think that looks good. And we'll drop our cards right into this app ID, this app div. So basically, every time I create one of these cards, it's going to be added or appended right to here, which means we're going to need a reference to this. So usually at the top of our code where we put our references, ooh, there's one here. In fact, let me move that up. I like to have all my references at the top of my script. So that was a mistake that I made early on. All right. We'll say let app equal document dot queries selector. I'm going to do ID app. All right. So that should give us a reference to our app. Now that we have a reference to it, we can append information to it. All right. So let's do this. Let's iterate over each of our rows. So we'll do rows dot for each. For each is a nice little function that allows you to basically loop over all of the rows inside of our array. And we can get a function, and the function uses the individual row. So let's see, let's make sure that that works. All right, we can do console.log. If I do this, it should output each row individually in the console. And there we go. So just to recap where we are right now, we did a query to get all of the notes in the database. Then when the notes were returned, we said, okay, let's loop through each row and get each row individually. And when we do that, let's log the row. There we go. And we get an object that has content, ID, and name. And just to make sure this is working properly, we'll say row.id, oops, and row.name to make sure we're getting those values. There we go. Starter note. And let's get to the row.content just to finish it off. Whoops. Row.content. All right, there's all of our data. Now that we have each one of these rows, we can pass the ID, the name, and the content to our card function, which is going to build our HTML. All right, so pretty simple. Let me just show you what that would look like if we just did this. Since we have access to the app div, all right, that's the div with the ID app here. There it is. We can modify the HTML in there. So we can say app dot inner HTML plus equals row.id. There we go. So this loops over every single row, and it just appends the row ID to our div up here. That's great. That's not exactly what we want yet, but that tells us that our code works. All right, so now instead of appending just the ID, we're going to append a new card. All right, we're going to build this card. So let's do that. We'll do card, row.id, row.name, and row.content. And there we go. We got our little starter app. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right. Now there's a lot more functionality to this that we could build out. I'll work on, let me do one more feature for you. Obviously we can do something that adds a new note. We could do something that edits the existing note. We can do something that deletes the note. It depends on which order you want to tackle things in. Let's do this. I'm not going to actually edit the note at the moment. I do want to implement the delete function. So just give me a second. But I do want to show you. Hopefully you've seen this. Oops. This is a nice little function called content editable. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this before, but it makes what's inside of an element editable. So I can actually just go in and start typing things. Pretty cool feature. And we simply just need to add it to any element that we want the user to be able to edit. Now, I'm not going to implement the save functionality. In fact, I'll change this to edit. I'll change this to save. I think that makes more sense. because we will make the content here editable. I can't say that right now. That means someone can just go in, start typing whatever they want, and then hit the save button. Now, I haven't implemented this feature, but it would be just as simple as adding a function to this that goes in, reads whatever text the person input, right? And then saves it to that ID in the database. I'm not going to do that one now. What I'm going to do now is add a delete button that deletes some of these notes so we can start cleaning these up a little bit. All right. So let's do that. We're going to have to make this little delete button functional. So rather than have an href, we're going to make this kind of simple. I'm not even going to add an event listener for this. This isn't really a JavaScript class. So we're going to do this really simple. We're going to add a little on-click function and just make sure that it works. We'll say alert hello. All right, so let's see if that works. And it does. We get a little alert that says hello, but that's not what I actually want it to do. I do want it to run a function, but I want it to be the delete function. And this is helpful. This lets call a delete function, which does not exist yet. But we need to know which number to delete, all right? Because if we just run delete, we're not going to know which one of these the user wants to delete. Thankfully, we had the ID stored, so we can actually pass that to the delete function. So now when the HTML gets output, each one of these delete buttons is going to have a delete function attached to it with the ID number. So in fact, if I go and I click on one of these, you will see that this says on click delete number 1. And it should go all the way down based on the ID numbers. So if I click on this one, this says delete ID number 4. So we're running the delete function and we're passing that ID into it. And once we have that, we can delete those specific items. All right, so let's do that. Let's add a delete function. Oops, sorry. Function. We'll call it delete note, so we don't confuse it with any other delete keyword that exists. So I'm going to change this to delete note. That looks good. All right, so let's make sure this is working. I'm going to add an alert to delete note. It is working. Looks good. All right, so if this worked properly, yeah, there we go. It's working. Whenever you click delete note, it works. All right, so now we're going to accept the ID. And all we have to do now is delete the note in the notes table based on that ID number. All right, so let's take a look at Dexie delete row. All right. So delete an object from the store. We need to specify the table, and then we say delete, and then the primary key. Pretty easy there. All right. So all we have to do is specify the table. We know the table name up here is called notes. So we can just do notes.delete and whatever ID was passed to it. To make this a little bit easier, I'm actually going to make this an async function. Again, apologies if you don't really understand this, but the point of this, oops, unexpected idea. function. Oops, I put this in the wrong place, didn't I? This is specific to JavaScript, but it just allows asynchronous um, actions to occur. All right, so if this worked properly, this will delete an item from the notes table. Cool. All right. So if I click on this one, it should delete an item. Let's see what happens. I click delete. Nothing happens. Whoops. Notes is not defined. Oh, whoops. Sorry. This should be db.notes. Pretty sure. My mistake. Let's try this again. db.notes. I spelled delete wrong. I got errors all over the place here. Let's try again. Delete. Okay. Nothing happened. All right. Now, reason is this actually succeeded. There was an item deleted from the database, but our markup doesn't get updated automatically, right? We actually use this to output all of the notes. Well, the problem is this only runs once. So these are all the notes that existed in the database when the page first loaded, but we actually just clicked on the delete button to delete a specific note. In fact, if I go over here and I hit refresh, you'll see that the item with ID number 1 was actually deleted. But that hasn't been updated in our display here. So what we're going to have to do is take this and put this into a function. That way we can call it every single time the page loads or after someone deletes a note so that we can update the page. All right. So let's see if this works. We'll put this into a function. We'll call this function update note list, just like that. All right. And we'll take all of this, inside of that function. All right. So now it doesn't run on load. We can go down here and call that function update note list. So that when the page loads, we get our updated note list. So this runs when the page loads. That's great. So it updates all of the notes in the database. It finds them all in the database and puts them on the page. That's great. But we also want to update this list when someone deletes one. All right, so let's do it again. Update note list. All right, so let's see what happens. All right, it loaded initially. We have all of our notes in here. Let's delete number, let's see which one this one is. This one is number 10. Let's go back here and make sure that number 10 gets deleted. If I click on it, gets sent back to the top, refresh the page, number 10 has been deleted. But I introduced a new problem. And that's that we now have double the number of items. So now the reason for that is because inside of our function here, I did plus equals, which is fine when app.innerHTML is blank. But when it already when it already has a bunch of items inside of it already, it just appends more items to it. So what we're going to have to do is actually take this and reset app.innerHTML. So we'll do app.innerHTML is equal to nothing. So this will clear existing notes from display. All right, so let's see. Let's see if this works. If we did this properly, I should be able to delete this note and get an updated display. Delete, 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 delete. Looks like we only have 2 left. It's working. And the last one. And now we have no more items in there. So there it is. We added a little delete note, and that's it. All right, now the last thing I'm going to do is add the ability to add a note. All right, so again, just to kind of make things easy, I'm going to, let's see, we've got this button. I'm just going to add an on click to this button just to make things easier for us. So we'll do on click equals, oops, add note, like that. All right, so let's make a function called add note. And this one's pretty simple. Basically, we're going to do the same thing that we did here. Every time someone runs add note. So we'll do db notes add, just like that. Now we want to change what these values are. And we want the name of the note to be whatever it is that someone typed in up here. Change this to click to edit. So that somebody, when a note gets created, it says click to edit. And the name is going to be whatever someone typed in. Thankfully, we already have input as an item that we can get the value from. So we're going to set the name to input.value. All right, so whatever someone typed in, we get input.value. And I'm going to make this, we're going to make this an async function as well. I don't want to have to deal with promises here. So we'll do async function add note. We will do await. And that just waits until the actual item gets added to the database. Now, once the item gets added to the database, you might have guessed what we want to do next. We want to update the note list so that it updates the display, right? So we'll do update note list to update the display since we've added a new item. So let's see if this works. Let's see, creating a note for DMD 3440. I click add, and there it is. It worked. That looks pretty good. So now I can go in and edit the note. I haven't implemented the save function yet, but I could go in there and do that next. I'm going to skip that for now. I can hit the delete button and actually delete that item. Whoops, wrong button. And it gets deleted from our database. I can add a new note. Notes for 10.9. Oh, my typing isn't very good today. Just like that. All right, one thing that's bothering me about this is that it keeps this here, which, is fine when you want to save the state, but after you actually click the add button, I think this should be reset. So I'm going to also down here, anytime a note is added, we'll say input dot value is equal to nothing, just to clear out what's actually in there. All right, so let's see if this works. We'll hit refresh. No errors. I'm going to get rid of the old note that's there. Let's make another one for DMD 3475. There's my note. Let's refresh. Looks pretty good. The only thing that's going on right now is that it's remembering. You know what? Let's change that too. Let's update the note name as well so that it doesn't fill that out every time. There we go. Much better. Okay. Let's refresh. Delete this one, delete this one. We'll add a note for 3475. Looks good. It's blanked out. I hit refresh. Still blanked out. Looks good. Add a note for DMB 3440. Add. There we go. So we got a simple little app that allows us to take notes. Doesn't allow them to save them yet, but that's as simple as going in and modifying a new note. You can do that easily with Dexie.js, or I'm sure whatever other system you're going to be using. All right. So I hope this was helpful. If you didn't fully understand the JavaScript that's happening here, that's okay. It's more important to understand what's happening and what I'm doing and how I slowly, step by step, iterated and incremented on our app and added features one at a time. As I mentioned in the past, I like to start with what the app is going to look like. So one of the things you noticed is that I added the actual cards and what the cards were going to look like. I put them right into the markup to see what they looked like first, to get them the way that I wanted them to look. And then once I was comfortable with those, I added them into JavaScript so that we could reproduce each of these cards and modify them based on what our variables were. All right. So that's it. Good luck on your assignment and see you next time.